I'd like to introduce our moderator, Veena Somareddy, who is the CEO of Neuro Rehab VR. We made a decision a while ago to ask people to moderate that had domain experience, and Veena's been through the process much earlier in the development cycle with her company, which is gives her a wonderful background to bring out the most in this talk. She's been in engineering for quite some time, starting in software development, in the graphic and real-time video area. Got involved with AR and VR with building course material for Google, and before founding Neuro Rehab. And on that note, I'm going to turn things over to Veena so that we can get started with the talk. Veena, it's up to you.
Thank you for that introduction, Steve. I'm really excited to moderating this panel today. So good morning, afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. And thank you for joining us for our panel today about the FDA OSEL Medical Extended Reality Program. And I am excited to moderate this panel because my device from our company, Neuro Rehab VR, is a medical device, and we have been through the FDA process and good manufacturing processes, and I'm really excited to learn like what's coming next when you're evaluating the tools for safety and effectiveness. So thrilled to have this distinguished panel today of experts and from the OSEL lab, and this is the third presentation, as Steve said, for the MedVR community. Thank you for you to please coming back, and hopefully we'll have more. And we are really eager to learn the updated information that you have for us today. So in this talk, as we know, the panelists will share current evaluation gaps and methods and regulatory science tools for evaluating the safety and effectiveness of VR and AR medical devices. So our panelists do bring a wealth of experience and knowledge to the table. So I'm honored to be introducing them today. First, we have Dr. Ryan Beams. He's a physicist in the Division of Imaging, Diagnostics, and Software Reliability at the Office of Science and Engineering Lab, which is OSEL, and the Center of Devices and Radiological Health, which is CDRS at the FDA. And he leads the Medical Extended Reality Program and has received a Ph.D. in optics from the University of Rochester. Who better than anybody who has a degree in optics to be working with medical extended reality devices, and a Bachelor of Science in Physics from the Wheaton College. Next, we have Dr. Chumin Zhao, who also has a PhD and is a staff fellow at the OSEL Office of Engineering and Center of Devices and Radiological Health at the FDA. And his research involves characterization, modeling, and image quality assessments of medical extended reality devices. He received his PhD and Master of Science degrees in Electrical Engineering from the University of Michigan and a Bachelor of Science in Physics from Hong Kong Baptist University. And last but not least, Dr. Miguel Lago, who's also a staff fellow in the same division of Imaging, Diagnostic, and Software at OSEL CDRH, and his interests involve image quality assessment, both on radiological medical devices such as MRI, CTs, mammography, and head-mounted displays of VR and AR medical devices. He is interested in developing universal tools for display quality assessment that can be seamlessly deployed to a wide variety of headsets. So welcome to our amazing panelists. And today, as I understand, there will be 3 parts to the talk. Dr. Ryan Beams will do an overview of the recent developments and updates from the Medical Extended Reality Program from your previous talk with the MedVR community. And then Dr. Chumin Zhao will do an overview of the recent research that he has been working on at this division. And next we'll have Dr. Miguel Lago, who will give an overview of recently publicly available tools to standardize the deployment of image quality patterns in extended reality medical devices. So I encourage all the attendees to actively listen. Please feel free to take notes. And again, we will have time for Q&A session in the end. And please add your questions into the Q&A chat box and we will get to it. at the end of their presentations. And we will also have a quick survey after Dr. Miguel Lago's presentation so that the FDA can receive feedback from what the attendees are expecting from the FDA and the tools that they have. So we have a quick survey, it's multi-choice, so please take that. And we will have that open to you all after Dr. Miguel Lago's presentation. So I hope everybody is as excited as I am. So let's dive into this enlightening conversation with our esteemed panelists. We hope to gain valuable insights, challenge your thinking about the regulations for extended reality. It is new, and I'm really excited about, the panelists here doing work on standardization of extended medical devices. We have been through the process, we have our own standards within the company, but sometimes the FDA at this point may not regulate it the way that we regulate our own devices. So it's exciting to know that there are standards that are coming out, and hopefully ultimately we'll leave here with a deeper understanding of the tools and standards that the FDA is developing for regulating the safety of extended reality medical devices. So I would like to invite our first panelist, Dr. Ryan Beams, to take it away.
All right, thank you very much. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I will move this bar out of the way. All right, so is that working for everyone? Okay, good. Let's go ahead and get started. It's always the first step in these talks. So yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm happy to be here and giving an update with my colleagues of some of the recent work we've been doing. So thank you, Steve, and thank you, Veena, for the great introduction. So I'm going to be talking about the OSEL Medical Extended Reality Program. And first of all, just to get all of us on the same page. Oh yeah, first a disclaimer for any mention of products. And then this kind of is just a graphical overview that I like to show to give an idea of why we're interested in this area. So across the top row is different applications that have gone through the FDA. So all of them actually are different devices that have gone through the FDA, either through the 510(k) process or the de novo pathway. The top row is all clinician facing, bottom row is patient facing. And then particularly on the top row, you can think about this going from left to right in increasing risk. And so there are a few things that are worth noting on this slide. First, a lot of the headsets are developed by the tech industry, which is something I think everyone in this call is very familiar with. And then depending on what the indication for use is, there's a lot of changes in what kind of regulatory questions come up, what needs to be evaluated. So for instance, if you're thinking about what you need to have in an intraoperative environment where potentially you're thinking about overlaying images onto a patient, that's going to be very different than if you're doing like a vision therapy for a pediatric case. So anyway, a lot of different users for these devices, different environments, and different applications. So here's kind of a graphical summary of some of the devices that have gone through the FDA process. And this is a different way to show kind of the same information. Basically, there's a lot of different specialties. So you can see this by this list of specialties here. And then on the far right side, that's my version of what these devices are for, who's using them. So basically, you can see these are patients, also clinicians, AR, VR, and different indications for use. So there's really a wide range of different applications where these devices are being used. And that's actually what makes it, I think, for us, both an interesting and a challenging job is to think about all the different technologies, the different indications for use, and how we can develop tests to evaluate them across this widespread. So next, I just want to highlight a few kind of recent resources that have come out from the FDA. So this one is through the FDA's Digital Health Center of Excellence. So this is a more complete version of the table that I showed before. This is online. And this is a list of all the devices that have gone through the FDA that use AR or VR in their application. So this is a good resource. So if you're thinking about submitting something to the FDA and trying to figure out what kind of information do other companies include, how do I find an appropriate predicate? Now this is in one place, it's searchable, gives you all the public information about these devices. Another resource that came out recently, which I think is also quite helpful, is so the Digital Health Center of Excellence also put together these infographics for both patients and healthcare providers. And this is basically like 7 key questions and some information to think about if you're a patient and your physician is thinking about using AR VR, or if you're a physician and you're thinking about using AR VR for a particular application. So again, these are also, you can download them, you can print them. Anyway, more resources that we're trying to bring to help. Yeah, I can share the links. So we can, to help share all this information with the public. Okay, next thing I just wanted to highlight as far as other resources that are helpful. So this is a list of current standards documents that are being worked on by different organizations. So if you're thinking about how to understand how to measure the devices, or if what some of the ergonomic concerns are, these are also some resources that are available. And then just want to highlight a couple community efforts that we're also taking part in. So here's the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. So we're planning a workshop that's going to be taking place in April. And this is really to take a lot of the topics that we're talking about today as far as the evaluation challenges, discuss them with the entire community and try to push this effort forward, not just ourselves, but all of us together. And then the last collaborative opportunity I wanted to mention very briefly is there's also an NSF Industry University Cooperative Research Center. And this is a collaboration between 3 academic sites, University of Maryland in Baltimore, and Michigan, along with industry partners. And really the focus of this is to take a look at pre-competitive questions and challenges that are an issue for the entire community and figure out ways to address them so they the whole ocean can rise together. All right, so now let me switch gears a little bit, get more specific into the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories and how we're contributing to this conversation and the evaluation of these devices. So as we already heard, so we're one of the research programs within the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories. And really our goal is to accelerate patient access through innovative, safe, effective medical devices through best in the world regulatory science. What that means is we work on developing lab-based regulatory science tools. We collaborate with our regulatory offices, and then we also try to collaborate with outside stakeholders. And then this will help to frame a lot of the discussions we're having today. So this is the workflow that we use. So things start with a publication, and then they move into these regulatory science tools, and then eventually into standards. And really the idea here is we want to take the regulatory science and the research we're doing, make it public so that it can help the entire industry. And so we're going to be focusing a lot on this end with the publications and the regulatory science tools. Okay. So now let's get into the specifics of some of the issues that come up with AR and VR devices. So this is a slide I like to show to illustrate why we care about image quality for these devices. So on the far left is an image, an input image that you're going to put onto one of the headsets. And so these are all images or measurements that we performed in our lab. And the next one, this is once you bring it onto a headset, you can see particularly here, if you're interested in this feature, then you end up with pixelation, reduction in contrast, resolution, things like that. And then if you want to bring it into, say, on an augmented reality device, maybe in a surgical environment, then you add in the ambient lighting, things can get washed out and more difficult to see. Now, then the last part is you also want to think about who's using this device. So if we go back to thinking about that pediatric application, even if the image quality on the headset is fantastic, if it's not designed for the intended population, there's still going to be an issue. So this is an example where if you have the incorrect interpupillary distance on the headset compared to the user, how you can end up washing out the contrast. So in a couple of years ago, we published this paper that was summarizing a lot of the evaluation challenges. And we did this with the other speakers at the 2020 public workshop that we hosted. And this is really summarizing a lot of the technical issues that we're interested in. And then these are some of the areas that we're actively involved in researching. We'd like to expand to others, but this is where we're at the moment. And then the other piece to this, of course, beyond the technical is thinking about the clinical. And that's really for us a great collaborative opportunity that we're interested in exploring. So a lot of the presentation today is going to be focused on image quality. And so this is kind of the workflow of how we are thinking about this. So if you start out with patient data, you then bring it on to the into some kind of rendering engine. And so that introduces our first regulatory science gap to think about is how is the pipeline impacting the image quality? So this can, for instance, could take the form of like color, luminance non-uniformity, anti-aliasing effects, resolution. Then from the rendering engine, then instead of going to a conventional display, you're going to bring this on to a headset, AR, VR. And then again, there's a number of challenges and open questions about how do you evaluate all the different performance aspects for these devices. And then finally, we don't want to just stop at how it behaves on the device in these kind of technical bench testing, but also want to think about what does this mean for the user? So bringing into that the perceptual challenges. So there's also some research projects that we're working on to try to understand binocular image quality, human observer studies, to really understand how to go from patient data all the way to task performance. So this is kind of a different version of the figure I showed before. So this is really what our medical extended reality program is trying to do. So we start with some research question, and then we develop a test method that is device agnostic. And so this is one that Chumin developed, which he's going to talk about more in a few slides. So I'll hold off on that. And then after we develop the test methods, get them published, we don't want to just stop there. We want to go further than that, because sometimes if you read publications, it can be a little hard to understand all the details, which are really important if you're going to make sure that, as say, a medical device developer, that your test methods are consistent and reproducible. You really need all those details. So we try to go a step further, release these regulatory science tools, which includes things like software, descriptions of bench testing setups, test pattern tools, which Miguel is going to talk about later, and then also working with standards groups to get these test methods included there. Now, one thing I want to point out with this, which a lot of these standards groups, which I think is particularly important, is that these aren't just for medical device manufacturers, it's for the entire like display industry. So really that's important, because since a lot of the headsets being used are not developed specifically for medical, if we want the tools that we're developing to have the biggest impact, we have to get to the beginning of that development chain. So here's just a couple setups of some of the kinds of things that we have in the lab. So here's a setup for looking at like spatial performance of these headsets. So we have different detectors we can put in. We can change the ambient lighting conditions, some of those kind of things. And then also you have a lot of degrees of freedom that allows you to rotate the camera to mimic basically what the human eye would do. Also temporal performance using fast cameras. And then on the other side, also looking at how the sensors perform, how well you can do registration, those kind of questions. And then finally, also looking at human factors with some more motion tracking type issues. So that's kind of just an overview of some of the different laboratory efforts that we have going on. Okay, so I'm going to highlight one research area that I've been working on, and then I'll turn it over to Chumin to do a deeper dive into a number of these topics. So one thing that you want to think about with these headsets is really how it's an entire device. Okay, so if you're thinking about a medical device application, we're going from an input image onto the headset and finally an output. And within that, the headset, there's issues like the rendering engine, the display, and the optics. So really, when you want to think about how the final output image is, it's not just the software that's involved, but it's really this entire package. So here's an example of a paper that we have that's currently under review, looking at basically how we can evaluate the resolution across the field of view and look at how the software implementation changes that. And what we find is, depending on how you've gone through that rendering process, you can actually change things like the luminance and the shape and symmetry of some of these features. Another example for how the software impacts things is you can also use the software to compensate for some of these issues. So here's an example of a test pattern going through a headset. The output image has a lot of non-uniformity. And then you can, instead of just being happy with this, you can go back and pre-compensate for the issues on this initial image so that you end up getting something out that's not perfect, but is closer to a more uniform image. And I think that's, I'll turn it over to you, Chumin, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Yep, thank you. Right. Think I'm sharing the screen. You see it? Good. Okay. All right. So next I'll keep talking about some of the technical challenges on the AR and VR headset and the OSEL's efforts to develop test methods to evaluate the image quality on the MXR devices. The first image artifacts that we're looking at is the veiling glare. And as shown on the slides, it especially affects the image quality on VR headsets at the peripheral of the field of view. For example, if I put the medical image at the center, here is a microcalcification for mammography. It looks pretty good, but if you move it towards the periphery, you can see how veiling glare can affect the image quality. To test it, we developed this test method using this white disk with a central black dot pattern. So theoretically, the luminance at the center should be 0, but because of veiling glare, you can measure the luminance at the center, which is associated with the glare. The experimental setup, as Ryan has already covered, it is a 5 degree of freedom rotation translation stage that you can mount the headset and the light measuring device on the stage, and it can achieve quite flexible rotation and translation. So we measure the luminance as a function of the inner ring radius and the outer ring radius using different sides of the test pattern. And you can take the derivative to get the point square function associated with the glare. And you can see how different the glare is between different hardware and technologies. We also measure it at different locations across the field of view. As shown in the previous slides on the example images, you can see the glare is much more substantial at the periphery of the field of view for this VR headset. Similar to the glare, optical aberration on the VR headsets can affect the image quality, such as contrast and effective resolution at the periphery of the field of view as well. And you may notice that the image quality is radially variant. So basically, if I'm moving from the center to the periphery, you can see the image quality getting worse. It is angularly symmetric due to the optical aberration. And you may also notice that the image quality is associated with the interpupillary distance of the user. If there is any mismatch between the user's IPD and the HMD's IPD setting, and the image quality can be even worse. To measure the contrast and effective resolution on MXR devices, the conventional method is using the grill method as documented in this IEC standards. And you can see, you can load different test patterns of the grill patterns with different spatial frequencies on the headset, and you can measure it at different locations across the display field of view. One limitation of this method is that because of the use of the optical lens on the headset, VR headsets, and that can cause a radially blur, especially happening in the radial direction. Depending on the orientation of the grill pattern, you can see the bottom row is a contrast map. So you can see we got inconsistent results following the orientation of the grill patterns, which is not good. So at OSEL, we developed this concentric ring method that is similar to the grill method, but using this bullseye pattern with periodic black and white rings. And you can also measure it at different spatial frequencies to measure the contrast. You load the pattern and get the luminance profile, and you measure it as a function, measure the contrast, microsync contrast, as a function of the radius and the rotation angle. You can get a polar plot as shown here. And so you can see this pattern can capture the contrast degradation the spatial variation of the contrast much better than the grill pattern. So that's one example of the test method we developed here at OSEL. So we want to go one step further. Most of the the bench testing is done on a single eyepiece. It can be either measured on the left eye or the right eye. But imagine if I'm getting a contrast map from a right eye measurement, it looks like this, and now the other eye will be a mirror of the right eye. And you can see, depending on the location, if I'm looking at one particular position, I might end up with one eye with superior image quality than the other. But how the brain views these two images is an unknown. And the question we would like to answer is that, is the monocular image quality measurement adequate to describe binocular vision? The test method we use is this human observer experiment using a WebXR tool that Miguel will cover later. So the test is to measure the so-called contrast sensitivity function, which is the human eye's contrast sensitive as a function of spatial frequency. The human eye is only sensitive to a particular spatial frequency, as shown in this example here. The test is asking the human subject to adjust the contrast of this Gilbert target at different locations on the display field of view until they can barely see the contrast. So in this case, you can find the threshold contrast for each target at different locations, and we measure it at different spatial frequencies to get the contrast sensitivity function. Is there a difference between monocular and binocular result? The answer is yes. So as shown here, you can see, for example, in this example, the monocular contrast sensitivity is measured in blue, and the binocular is in blue and the monocular is in yellow, and you can see there's a huge difference. So basically, the human brain can pick the image, the eye with the better image quality. And it is important for when we do the optical measurement to consider binocular vision. So this is the example of a first work to start this binocular image quality evaluation. So now let's move from spatial domain image quality evaluation to spatial temporal domain with motion involved. This can be very common for MXR. You might deal with motion of the digital content or motion of the user. Here, the motion we're talking about is smooth pursuit for the eye rotation. As an illustration here, I'm showing a video that a target is moving from left to the right, and the eye is tracking this motion. The motion on the display is not continuous, and if I decompose the motion into the spatial domain and the spatial domain in the x-axis and the temporal domain in the y-axis, and you can see the motion is discrete. So the content is static within a display frame, but is moving between neighboring frames. As the eye is continuously tracking this motion, then with respect to the moving eye on the fovea, the digital content is actually moving in the opposite direction within a display frame, and the spread of this content within this frame is causing motion blur. And here's an example of how motion blur can affect the image quality on the headset. In some cases, the motion blur can be more severe. For example, if the digital content is refreshing at a lower refresh rate than the display frame rate, and you may end up with multiple images overlaid on top of each other, and that is a more severe case for motion blur. To quantify that, so we can do a spatial temporal image quality characterization. In this case, I'm measuring the spatial temporal resolution. You may use a fast response camera. In this case, we capture multiple frames, multiple images per display frame, and you can obtain a spatial temporal response of this, which is a single pixel line moving on the display from left to the right, and you can get the spatial and temporal decomposition as shown here. And if we consider smooth pursuit, and we need to shift this this position of the line with respect to the eye, and then we get this spatial temporal response with smooth pursuit. So the lateral spread describes the motion blur. Sometimes it could be a little bit tricky because you need a camera with very fast response and a high resolution at the same time. So here we also develop a simpler method that you can actually do spatial measurement and temporal measurement separately. These are two simple measurements. You can do a line square function measurement to get the spatial MTF, and you can get the waveform, the temporal response of the display by using a photodiode, for example. And if you know the motion, and we have already just understand how spatial temporal response can be generated, and then we can combine all three together to compute a spatial temporal response from simple spatial and temporal measurement with different motion speed. The last topic I would like to cover is AR, augmented reality with optical see-through for surgical applications. One of the challenges is that the overlay of digital image onto the physical environment when we use AR headsets. The image quality really depends on both the AR display configuration and the physical environmental conditions. I'm showing here an example of, I'm showing two versions of the digital image and the physical target, which is this contrast target. If I overlay this two together, depending on the display configurations and the lighting condition, you can see if the display is very bright, you end up losing the physical target. For example, if you're using the AR headset and you directly overlay the digital image onto the patient, if the display is very bright, you cannot see the patient. On the other hand, if the display is not bright enough, but the physical environment is bright, for example, in the operating room, you end up losing the contrast on the display. So we need to do some measurement about the contrast with optical see-through, basically in the ambient light conditions. The method is using this checkerboard pattern with different gray level, gray pairs. IL is the lower gray, IH is the higher gray, and repeat the measurement with different luminance of the ambient light. We can compute the microson contrast as a function of the gray combinations, the IL and IH, as shown here. So basically, the first row shows the measurement in dark, and the second row shows the measurement with this luminance of the physical environment. And you can see how the ambient light can decrease the contrast on the display. We can also measure the contrast as a function of XY by moving this ROI, basically a 4-square ROI across the display field of view, and you can get a contrast map to describe the contrast non-uniformity. For AR headset, it is very common to have a non-uniform contrast and luminance, especially for those wave-guided technology. So we can even go one more step to develop a model to use the model to optimize the image quality by changing the display configurations. Here we combine the human observer experiment with this target detection model that you can describe the target in the spatial frequency domain with the display model, which is the luminance response and resolution and noise. On top of that, we have the eye filter, which is a contrast sensitivity function. Then we can compute the detectability or AUC, and we can use that to optimize the display configuration. For example, the gamma, which is the display luminance response, and the maximum luminance of the display for a specific imaging task. And here's an example that doing this optimization, I can see, find the optimized display configuration that I can see both the digital target and the physical target at the same time. So it's just an example here. With that, I will turn it to Miguel, and he will talk about a recent tool that we developed at OSEL.
Okay, thank you, Chumin. Let's see, hopefully you can see this. So one of the challenges that we had was to, well, we had so many different devices with so many different technologies that it was very hard for us to make one pattern and display it on different devices so that we can compare this tests that Chumin was talking about, for instance. So when developing a VR application, first of all, you have to choose a device which they're constantly evolving and constantly getting new versions of these devices. I think the list I have here, I should add it, the Meta Quest 3 already. So not only the device, but you also have to choose, or not, you don't choose, but they are based on a technology. Some of them need to use the Microsoft Extended Reality Toolkit. Some of them are standalone Android devices. So that's another layer of something you have to consider. On top of that, you also need to choose some kind of a graphical engine, which means how are you going to render a scene on the headset so it's actually displayed on those the little screens on the in front of your eyes. And finally, you have to somehow send your application or deploy your application on those headsets, and then you can, for that, you can have an application store, or you can sideload, or you can use a website. So to try to simplify all this, we chose WebXR to develop our tools. WebXR is a very simple platform that runs it could run an XR, AR, or VR scene on any browser that's compatible. That means that any headset that has a compatible browser, which are, I think, all of them, will be able to load the tools that we make without the need to download any special tool, or without us needing to compile a different version of the tool for different technologies of headsets. So, and this is from the WebXR official site. It allows for instant deployment, as I said. It also is future-proof, meaning that new hardware should be retro-compatible with anything that you have developed before for WebXR. You can also do VR and AR at the same time. And you don't need any app store, and everything is handled by WebGL, which is the underlying technology of WebXR. So choosing that, what we did is to develop a toolkit for evaluation of image quality on head-mounted displays, which, as I said, it's a way to have just one deployment or one test pattern and so that we can display it on different headsets. It's quick, it's comparable, and the link I have here is our public tool, which I want to show you very quickly. That we developed a tool that you can edit scenes, you can create different patterns, and this is all modifiable. You can, for instance, even share a link that has a package that we can maybe send someone and say, hey, test these patterns that we have here. And these are just 3 different or 4 different things that you can mix and match. You can, for instance, the rings that Chumin was showing before, we have them here, and you can quickly go to edit an entity, maybe change the number of rings to 20, and you make your own pattern. You can move it a little to the right if you want to, test different angles. So it is a very easy tool that is public. It's on our GitHub. The links are on the presentation, and I hope that you can access them later. And I don't want to get too much into this, but I encourage you to go to our GitHub and test these tools. There is also some documentation on how to use them. I have a quick video of a different tool that the one I showed. This is how you go into a browser, you click on the button to open the VR immersive mode, and then you have a VR scene on your headset without the need to download or do anything. And we tried with very different headsets, and it was very, very encouraging to try the Magic Leap 2 that we never tried. We opened the website, and everything was running perfectly right away. I think the controllers, we still had to tweak a little bit of that, but it was really cool to see it working from scratch without the need of deploying anything new. And this is not the only regulatory science tools we have on the FDA website. There's many more that you can also go to this site here and searched for other computational models that we have, other phantoms, not only for medical devices and for sure not only for VR or MXR. So the FDA is pushing a lot, or OSEL is pushing a lot lately for the development of these public tools to help the assessment of new medical devices. And I know there's only 2 minutes left, so this is all for me and for everyone. And questions now. I'm going to stop sharing.
Well, thank you so much for all that amazing information. I was just monitoring the chat, and when you all were doing the presentation, one of them said this was freaking amazing. So an interesting, and thank you for creating these tools so to make our life easier to actually go test our medical devices and our software to make sure that they're, up to the standards that you're talking about. So next, Steve, I just wanted to check, are we doing the survey? If we are doing the survey, please have that up in a second. And while Steve is doing that, I have a few questions from the audience and we will go through that. The first one is from, so we have the survey up. This is information that the FDA would like to receive from you all as the audience so that they can do a better job and also figure out, how these tools can help you. Awesome. So the first question was just curious, is OSEL an internal only testing lab? Can the lab be contracted to perform these tests for companies seeking FDA 510(k) clearance?
Yeah, I can go first, and if you guys want to jump in. So that's a good question. So we don't do we're not like a testing house that you could hire to do things, but what we really are trying to focus on is developing the test methods, getting all the information we can publicly available so people can do it themselves. So for instance, like the tool Miguel showed, so then instead of having to go through all the programming yourself, it's there. So you have like for instance, the contrast pattern that Chumin showed, then you can deploy it using the tool Miguel showed, and then you're already a lot of the way there on being able to do it. So the focus is more on developing device agnostic methods and getting them publicly available, opposed to being like hired to do the testing ourselves.
Okay, well, thank you for that information. Next one is by Dr. Joe Elliott. I'm guessing this question is for Dr. Chumin Zhao, but any of you can take it. What is the preferred method for measuring IPD? Is there a particular app?
I don't know if there's any particular app to measure IPD. So I'm not sure if this means the IPD of the user or the IPD of the headset. If it's the headset, then some of the headset has the IPD adjustment, and even the software, you can see what is the IPD setting, and you can also measure from the center of the lens between the two eyepieces. Just do a physical measurement.
Okay, well, thank you for that information. I think you touched upon this a little bit, but here's a question from the audience. Are there specific methods to measure the image quality and contrast for ultrasound images?
I think for testing the image quality for contrast, we don't normally specific for any like medical applications. We probably just load the test pattern. It's just a simple test pattern, like either the ring pattern or grill pattern, to test the contrast. But we don't load a ultrasound image to do the contrast test. I don't know if you, Ryan, have anything else to add on top of that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, certainly depending on the kind of image that you're looking at, it could change what kinds of tests you need to do. So like for ultrasound, for instance, some of like the spatiotemporal type of work that Chumin was showing, I think becomes more important. And then kind of going back to an earlier slide that I showed is, so this is also a collaborative opportunity for us. So we're trying to develop these just very general test methods, but making sure that they're applicable for particular indications for use and particular application areas, and what are the like specific pass criteria and things like that for a particular application. That's something that's kind of an ongoing collaboration opportunity. And yeah, we're always looking for collaborators.
I have some thoughts about that, so would love to contribute. So our next question is, I think in the beginning, Dr. Ryan, you spoke about how these medical devices, you have to think about it as a whole. It's the software plus the hardware. So I think this question is relevant to that. Is the FDA open to de novo 510(k) applications which are hardware agnostic? Example, an application for any hardware device which meets some minimum spec.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's one that comes up a lot. And so there's a couple parts to this answer. One is it's difficult in this setting to give a specific answer without knowing exactly what you're doing. So if you're at the point that you're thinking about submitting, what I would encourage you to do is take a look at the Q-Sub process. You can come in, talk to us, and get a lot of feedback. But to give you a little more information now about that, I think where the hardware currently is, it's difficult to think about to separate them out and go just based on minimum specs. So for instance, if you pull up the spec sheet for two headsets and one tells you, they both maybe even tell you that they have the same field of view. You may not know if they're talking about diagonal. You don't know what the spacing is that they have for the user to the headset, and all of these things end up impacting the performance. Similarly, like you often get maybe the number of pixels on the display that doesn't tell you much about what the final image quality is going to be. And then on top of that, there's the software issue. So I think I'm hoping that the community can move towards having specifications that are a better indication of the performance. But I think where we're at currently, it's very difficult to separate out the hardware and the software. But again, if there's specific questions, I encourage you to come in and discuss with the FDA so you can get maybe a more detailed answer.
Okay. On that realm, I had a question too when you spoke about this part of it. Would the performance testing and making sure that the regulatory compliance fall on the hardware manufacturer or the manufacturer of the product, which is in our case, we are the manufacturer of the product as a software as a medical device. So it's our responsibility to make sure our software applications and even if it's the off-the-shelf hardware, it's our responsibility to make sure we are in regulatory compliance. How would that be moving forward? Because you have both hardware compliance and software compliance when it comes to medical extended reality devices.
I think I understood your question, but so you're wondering
whose responsibility would it be?
Who's responsible? Yeah, so it's really the responsibility of the medical device company that's coming in. So for instance, like if Microsoft doesn't clear the HoloLens 2 for medical applications. So, but if a particular company has a particular application that they want to use that hardware, then then they would come to us and have to provide the testing to support how they're going to use it, so their indication for use. But I'm aware that creates a challenge, right? Because if there's changes in hardware and things like that, and that's where some of developing these test methods and things, we're hoping to lower that barrier. So as the hardware changes, that it's not as difficult for software development companies.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that answer. Our next question is, what are your thoughts on virtual reality design as it relates to gender-based differences in cyber sickness, interpupillary distance, sex differences in low-level visual processing, depth cues, like motion parallax and shape from shading? So basically, how do you design virtual reality content which is inclusive of gender differences?
Yeah, I guess I can start with that. Maybe Miguel or Chumin have something to add. Yeah, I think that's a great question. So there's a couple places where I think that comes into play. So certainly if there's user testing, making sure that you're thinking about the entire population that you're wanting to have use the device and not just a pretty narrow group of people. We have some collaboration projects looking at the impact of some of the depth cues and cyber sickness and some of those things, but that's really kind of ongoing work. And as far as the design part, maybe someone else has some better tips there, because I'm really more focused on the evaluation part. But I think it's a great question. I think certainly an area that we need to do more work. I don't know if Chumin or Miguel have anything to add.
Okay. We
Yeah, I
can
think
go ahead.
okay. I think we can also, like, for the hardware design, some of the advancement in the optics can help solve some of the problems, like having a better optics with a larger eye box that can solve of the IPD issues. But it's yeah, it's a very complicated question and requires a lot of effort from both the industry and yeah, thank you.
Definitely, I understand that. I think starting off with a diverse team would help with understanding how it would affect both women and men on your team in your company. So that's maybe the first step to start off with, making sure it works for everyone. Our next question is, have you also developed test methods to measure precision accuracy of the eye tracking in VR devices? That's actually a very good question.
Do you have any thoughts on that one, Miguel? Otherwise, I can take that one too. So I know you've thought more about eye tracking.
Yeah, I have done eye tracking, but never on the VR devices, so I don't really know what to respond there.
Yeah, so this is not, I mean, at the beginning, I listed a lot of different research questions. We haven't gotten to everything. So this would be one that we haven't dug into. I know there's some interest from people in trying to develop like artificial eyes and things like that, so that then you can do bench testing, because it's easier if you can do bench testing and don't have to do everything using users. But yeah, that's something that we're definitely very interested in, but haven't gotten there yet.
Just another thought to finish this. I think the new devices that will come with foveated rendering, which means that only where you're looking at will be displayed with high quality, and the rest will not. That's going to be a hot topic very soon, and I think that we'll need to do some efforts there. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a question I wrote down when Dr. Chumin was talking about motion blur, because one of the things that a lot of game companies used is LODs, which is level of detail, so that only the images that are closer to you are rendered and the ones that are further away are blurred, just so that we can keep our frame rates really high. And that's one of the standards we set within our company. So are you saying that motion blur and FOV is bad, or are you saying it'll just be another discussion that we have to kind of, as a company, as an industry, we have to create a standard for it?
I want to say, if the frame rate is really important in application for MXR, then if you're using this kind of, I don't want to say tricks, but some ways to reduce the load, and if that is causing any impact on the image quality, that's something that we should understand, at least to know if there's any effect on the reduce of quality or resolution or blurriness on anywhere on the screen.
Right. Yeah, for us and a lot of companies that are working with patients, especially in stroke, TBI realm, frame rate, keeping that high and making sure there's no latency is one of the most crucial things for safety. So that's something that we always think about and have standards set. Awesome. So our next question is, it says real question. So we have been talking about testing the physical system, how testing human user. Image may be technically perfect, but Dr. Zhao what if somebody has perceptual issues or other personal issues that keep them from integrating information?
I think, Chumin, you probably have some good answers to this one, but this, absolutely agree. So that's why we've spent a lot of effort on being able to perform the bench tests, but you have to go further than that. You have to take it to the user. And then what we're working on, doing a lot of research on, which I'll turn it over to Chumin and Miguel to touch on that a little bit more, but is trying to connect the bench testing to the user testing. Because if we can build that bridge, then you can imagine, like, if you're a company coming in, then we can do the bench testing, have an idea of how it would perform from a perceptual standpoint, and then it becomes a much easier process as far as the testing. But yeah, that bridge is critical, and we're working on that. But I don't know, Chumin, Miguel, I know you guys are both doing work in that area.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I will follow up on that. I think it is important to bridge the gap between optical measurement and what the eye actually sees. For example, if you do optical measurement, like measure the MTF, and the eye sees is actually contrast sensitivity function. So there can be some model maybe to link this to, then help us to understand how would you get some optical characteristics, how would that reflect, at least predict what the eye can see. So that's one of the effort that we are trying to move forward and basically have a better understanding of the perception side.
And I feel like this is where you can bring in the gender differences and have like you need to test with this population, this age, and to make sure that it, you know, works for everyone and they're able to see the optics like it should be displayed. Well, thank you for that. We have one last question. So much of this is centered around head-mounted devices. Any thoughts on iOS, Android-based AR applications?
So I'm assuming this is meaning like kind of like tablet based and things like that,
Yeah,
mobile phones. Yeah, so our group has done some work with that. I think before any of the three of us joined the FDA. But that is definitely something that we've done some work. A lot of what we've been focusing on is head-mounted displays. And yes, I don't know that I have a great answer for that, but part of the reason we've been focusing on the head-mounted displays is there's a lot of motion investment on that side from industry, and it opens up some pretty different questions as far as like the image quality and the sensors and the tracking that may not be there for some of the handheld devices. But I mean, yeah, that's a good point. That would be something else to take a look at.
Amazing. Well, thank you everyone for this insightful discussion and the presentation. It was definitely very, very interesting. And I'm so excited about FDA coming up with these regulations and standards that we as an industry can follow to make sure that our, you know, the products that we're building is safe and in regulatory compliance, which makes it much more easier than maybe 3-4 years ago when we were trying to become a medical device and we didn't really have these standards. So I'm very thankful and excited that you're working on this project. And thank you everyone for the attendees for being here today for this hour and amazing questions. And we're excited about, you know, hosting you all again. And back to you, Steve.
Thank you, Veena. This was a wonderful talk and expertly moderated to Ryan, Chumin, and Miguel. Thanks for your ongoing support and your ingenuity and creativity in evolving with the technology that we're using. It's a very positive influence and making it into people's innovators' minds that there is a regulatory aspect and it's a process and the outcomes are predictable is very, very important for them to promote further development. So on that note, thanks to our audience, and again, thank you, Veena, Ryan, Chumin, and Miguel on a great talk. Don't forget the talk next week. In 2 weeks on visual deficits. I'll put the link in the chat one more time, and we'll see you then. Thank you.